Cultural Resource Management in the Keystone XL pipeline. Keystone XL is part of the Keystone pipeline system. It would transport crude oil over 2,000 miles from Hardisty, Alberta to Port Arthur, Texas, covering around 1,700 miles within the U.S. The pipeline consists of 36-inch pipe and would have a minimum of 4 feet of ground cover, and according to the ACHP, it will include 30 new pump stations, 74 main line valves, 1 tank farm, 2 crude oil delivery sites, and approximately 50 permanent access roads, as well as a 110-foot construction right-of-way on each side of the pipe, and additional access roads, stockpile sites, railroad sidings, and construction camps would be necessary for completing the pipeline. Keystone XL pipeline consists of 3 main segments. The Keystone XL segment from Hardisty to Steel City, Nebraska, the Keystone XL Cushing extension from Cushing, Oklahoma to Port Arthur, Texas, and the Houston lateral segment. The project was proposed in 2008 and is currently under review by the U.S. Department of State for a presidential permit. The EPA rejected a draft EIS in July of 2010, citing inadequate spill response plans, greenhouse gas emissions measurements, and general safety. 1 month later, the final EIS stated the proposed pipeline would pose no significant impacts to most resources if environmental protection measures are followed. However, it would present significant adverse effects to certain cultural resources. Keystone XL is an undertaking under Section 106 of the NHPA due to the federal permitting and the project's potential to affect historic properties. Since it is a Section 106 undertaking with potential effects, the lead federal agency, in this case the Department of State, must make a reasonable and good faith effort to identify and consider the effects of the project to cultural resources. Listed here is a short list of the federal, state, and local agencies and other consulting parties that were involved in the process. The Section 106 process on this project has been ruled by a lengthy and often revised programmatic agreement, or PA. PA has been modified and amended 7 times since July 2009 according to the ACHP. The programmatic agreement outlines individual agencies' responsibilities in terms of management, avoidance, reporting, and more. It details the management of identification, determinations of eligibility, consultation, unanticipated discoveries, curation, and mitigation. It also includes 2 monitoring plans. These describe how construction will be monitored for compliance with Section 106 of the NHPA. The first monitoring plan, the Historic Trails and Archaeological Monitoring Plan, addresses the archaeological issues and potential effects to the El Camino Real de los Tejas National Historic Trail in Texas. The second is a Tribal Monitoring Plan. It was developed as a result of TCP studies. The Department of State consulted with tribes and identified areas along the main APE that will be monitored during construction and is continuing to work with tribes in refining the areas. The PA has a number of signatories and consulting parties, but out of 45 tribes consulting, only 1 tribe is a signatory on the PA. That tribe is the Lower Brule Sioux in South Dakota, and this is due to the transmission lines and substation proposed to be built on their reservation. Section 106 cultural resource surveys and identification were conducted in all 6 states. Each began with an extensive literature and historic review. Also, survey data was purchased from the Rockies Express natural gas pipeline. Pedestrian field surveys of a 300-foot wide corridor along the pipe's route were completed in all 6 states, along with miles and acres of access roads, storage facilities, transmission lines, and the like. These were conducted between 2008 and 2010. Areas that remain to be surveyed will be conducted as landowner access allows. 113 cultural resources were identified in Texas. They include 1 historic trail, 33 historic structures, and 88 archaeological and isolated finds. The Department of State developed an historic trail and monitoring plan in the PA for the El Camino de los Tejas National Historic Trail, though no adverse effects have been identified as of yet. Oklahoma had 93 cultural resources identified, including 88 archaeological sites and isolated finds, 34 historic structures, and historic Route 66. In addition to pedestrian surveys, 62 backhoe trenches and 3,246 STPs were excavated to help identify and evaluate the sites. Historic Route 66, with portions listed on the National Register, is monitored under the Route 66 Corridor Preservation Program that is administered by the National Trails System Office and will be avoided by boring underneath it. In Kansas, only 2 archaeological sites and 1 historic trail were identified. This is due mostly to the fact that they are only adding 2 pump stations there. The Santa Fe National Historic Trail will not be affected by the proposed route as it does not cross any intact sections of the trail. In Nebraska, 91 cultural resources were identified, including 22 archaeological sites and isolated finds, 69 historic structures, and historic trails. Of the archaeological sites, 1 is possibly associated with the Pawnee Nation Indian burial ground. It is avoided and unevaluated. The historic trails include the Oregon, California, Mormon Pioneer, and Pony Express, but the project will not affect any intact segments of these. In South Dakota, 120 cultural resources were identified, 114 archaeological sites and isolated finds, and 6 historic structures. .311 cultural resources were identified in Montana. 262 were archaeological sites and isolated finds. With 145 of those being avoided or recommended for avoidance, and 107 not avoided or not eligible. 49 were historic structures, 12 were avoided or recommended for avoidance, and 37 not eligible or not avoided, as well as the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail, which would have no adverse effects since it is not possible to define an exact location of the trail. Also identified were stone circle sites. Many of these were identified and remain unevaluated. Several may be adversely affected, so the Department of State is consulting with the Blackfeet and Chippewa Cree tribes, the BLM, and the Montana DEQ on these matters. These are included in the tribal monitoring plan that was mentioned in the programmatic agreement before. The project is still hotly contested, mostly over the Ogallala Aquifer and other environmental concerns. But regardless of the politics, the Section 106 process was followed and compliance was met under the terms of a lengthy and often revised programmatic agreement.